Islam in its tracks in Egypt, I'm for it. And if I can help, then I will do it. Because as President Bush, I'm just really grateful for people in Egypt rising up. Oh, all right. Ready?
Yeah, I'll ask them from right here. We're going to start out with the easy ones. I want to combine the first two. It says, Louie, why won't you run for president? And then the next one is, will you consider running for Senator Cornyn's seat? Yeah.
Thank you. I love Clint Eastwood's line, a man's got to know his limitations. And I'm highly flattered, I really am. I know this will sound funny, and some of you have heard me say it before, but I believe this. In 1960, the Kennedy-Nixon debates were the turning point in American politics. Before that, television was not most important, not all that important. From the 1960 Kennedy-Nixon debates, television became the most important factor in who would be elected president. You don't have to be all that smart to be elected president, but you do have to have hair. Before 1960, you could be Eisenhower and get elected. And I'm sorry, I mean, you just got to have hair if you're going to be elected president. But I feel like, you know, God graces us with different gifts, and since I know I could never be elected president, then I don't have the governor on me that there are people in the House and Senate have on them. And you'll have to ask them if they'll take a stand with you. And you can see the wheels turning. Well, I may run for president someday, and this might come back to haunt me, so I better not get involved. I don't have that problem. I don't have to worry if something's going to come back to haunt me when I run for president, because, you know, I'm not going to ever be elected president. So I got more freedom to just call it like I see it, and like I believe a majority in East Texas believe as well. As far as the Senate, there are times I've been so proud of John Cornyn, and he's the #2 guy in the Senate right now. But let me just tell you, I don't run for anything unless I feel it in my heart. And I'm sorry, I haven't felt it. I'm in the middle of a battle for what I feel like is the soul of this country in the House. Believe it or not, I really feel like we're making progress. Every month, sometimes weekly, sometimes days in a row, I will have members of Congress saying, you know, Louie, I finally figured out you've been right. I've been played. What can we do? We're making progress. I love Thomas Massey as a young freshman this year, a really smart guy. And he told me that, he said, when you stood up at our conference, my very first conference, private, just Republicans, and nominated Newt Gingrich for Speaker, after you spent 3 minutes explaining what a bad leader John Boehner was, I thought you had to be the craziest guy in the Congress. And he said, within a few months, I figured out this is the smartest guy in the Congress. And he said, I want to help you on anything I can help you on. And he has been a real ally. So I think we're making progress, and I think that can continue.
Next question. Where do you stand on term limits?
I think term limits are a good idea. I do see, and Mark Levin, I love the guy, and he sent me a copy of his new book, The Liberty Amendments. I completely commend it to you. It is a fantastic book. Liberty and Tyranny is still my favorite. Utopia is great. But one of his constitutional amendments he proposes is term limits in there. And I think it would take a constitutional amendment to do that. It's been tried before different ways and been struck down. But I think it needs not just to be term limits of elected officials in the federal government. You've got to have, and I expect to talk to Mark about it, but you've got to have term limits on the bureaucrats. Because already with all the turnover, that there's been in the House and in the Senate, the arrogance of some of the bureaucrats is just incredible. They don't care what the law says. And a couple of airline pilots were telling me, I asked them if they were carrying a gun, because Congress, before I got elected, passed a law to allow pilots to carry guns. The FAA lobbied strong against it. They didn't want them carrying guns. Well, most of them are former military. They qualified with weapons. And they told me that after the law passed, the FAA didn't want it to pass, that the law just basically says all they have to do is get certification to carry in the cockpit and they're good to go. Well, the FAA put the restrictions in where you had to go this one place, I think they said it was in Arizona or New Mexico, nowhere near a major airport. You had to go for more than one day, and just hardly anybody has time to go do that. This is a case of bureaucrats overcoming the will of what the law is. We have got to limit how long a bureaucrat can be in a position. Otherwise, they're going to run this place. They already, in so many ways, EPA, and under this president, they've really gotten cocky. And I love the Corps of Engineers. They've done so much good for providing water in America, but there are people in the Corps of Engineers that have gotten way too bureaucratic in their control and wanting more and more power. So I would like to see both. It seems pretty obvious that if we're going to get that done, you'd have to promise some of the guys there that they would, all right, we'll give you a pass, but this is going to kick in at a certain date, and make sure that, because it needs to be done. It is, I'm sure many of you know, the founders never expected people to make serving in Congress a lifetime work. So I support them, and I hope that before I leave, and I'm not staying forever, I just don't think that's right. But I've got at least a few more years I feel like I can contribute if you let me, and we'll do what we can during that time.
Thank you. Next question. Where do you stand on the Keystone Pipeline and expanding drilling?
Well, two different things. The Keystone Pipeline, I support it. And I know that we've got people in our district here in East Texas, my district, who've been adversely affected by the Keystone Pipeline. And I will do everything I can to make sure that they're properly remunerated, because that's what's supposed to happen. But I'm for it. It's jobs, and because our president, United States president, stood in the way of that pipeline coming from Canada down to Texas, the Chinese went to Canada, as I've been told, and they said, hey, we'll do a pipeline to your west coast. Because one Canadian, I don't know that he has the power to know for sure, but he says, look, what you watch, what will most likely happen. There'll end up being a pipeline all the way to the Pacific. And if you guys linger much longer, it'll be great for us. We'll send it to the West Coast. And then when you eventually get around to figuring out you missed out and you finish your pipeline all the way to Texas, then at that point, we'll get to see who offers us more money, you or China. Well, if our president hadn't lingered, there would be no bargaining between, or bidding between the U.S. and China. With regard to drilling, y'all, when I got elected in 2004, everybody I knew of had come reconciled the fact we could never be energy independent. And it is exciting what has happened. We can be energy independent now. We know we can. Between the oil that's been found and the natural gas that we're able to produce, and gas is such a great product, and there are more and more trucks being produced now that run on natural gas. Heck, I would hook my car up to run on natural gas. I'd convert it now, except I'd never be able to get back from Hemphill, you know, when I run down there, because they don't have any place to fuel up. But this is exciting. And it's also the reason we should not be hurting in high unemployment times in America. And I've said this a number of times, and so I'm thrilled when I say something and then I hear other people say that. I love hearing it. And that is that we ought to be going through a new economic renaissance. And I started using that a couple of years ago, and I heard Paul Ryan, my friend Paul, say that on the campaign trail as vice president. This ought to be a time of economic renaissance. I just smiled. I thought, well, that's great. So anyway, it should be. And I don't want to ever overlook the obligation government has to make sure things are done safely. British Petroleum should never have been allowed to keep drilling in the Gulf. They had about 799 egregious safety violations. I think Shell had one or two, Exxon had one or two. There were a number of drillers that had one or two, and they had 799. They should never have been allowed. Government has an obligation to make sure things are done safely. And frankly, when we had 2 or 3 little tremors, 3.1 to 3.3 down around Timpson, I wondered, you know, was there any effect? And so when you go to check it, what you find out is Haynesville, you know, maybe around 10,000 feet or so, depending on where you are. But now they've been drilling for Bossier, the Bossier Shale down below that, around 18,000 feet. And I've been at a well where they were fracking down around Center. Well, when you find out that these tremors in East Texas around Timpson Center have emanated from around 30 to 32,000 feet, then you instantly go, oh, well, that couldn't have done that. You can't fire bullets through pipe casing at 18,000 feet and cause an earthquake 2 miles below that. It just, and that's really all we're talking about. So I was encouraged to find that out. And still, despite this administration's effort to shut down hydraulic fracking and the UAE and others trying to fund movies like Matt Damon's movies to tell you how horrible it is,